through Christ. So this is a wonderful morning for us. We praise you. And we thank you for what you're going to teach us these next few moments we're together. And we are grateful for your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so why don't you start us live, Andy? We're already live? Very good. So, welcome to those of you watching live on Facebook or on YouTube. On the internet, we're glad you joined us this morning. We're going to be in John chapter 10. Those of you who've been around for the past few weeks know that we're doing a series called I Am Jesus in His Own Words. And we're looking at John, the Gospel of John, and because 7 times in the Gospel of John, Jesus makes a statement that begins with these 3 words, I am thee. 7 times he makes that statement, and we've looked at 2 of those already. I am the bread of life is the first week. Last week we talked about I am the light of the world. Now today we're going to talk about I am the good shepherd, one of my favorite of all. I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. Look in these verses. We're going to read 5 or 6 verses today, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 10. Jesus said, I tell you the truth, the person who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, some of your translations may use the word gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The one who guards the door opens it for him, and the sheep listen to the voice of the shepherd. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Isn't that a beautiful picture? When he brings all his sheep out, he goes ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. Then jump on down to verse 10 there in your Bible. A thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I came to give life, life in all its fullness. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. The worker who is paid to keep the sheep is different from the shepherd who owns them. When the worker sees a wolf coming, he runs away and leaves the sheep alone. Then the wolf attacks the sheep and scatters them. The man runs away because he is only a paid worker. Some of your translations may say a hired hand. And he does not really care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I give my life for the sheep. All right, now let's think about sheep and a shepherd. First of all, to be a shepherd, you have to have sheep, right? I mean, you can't call yourself a shepherd if you don't have sheep. So I want to talk to you, first of all, on your outline there, about the shepherd's sheep. Because here's the deal. You and I are likened to sheep in the Bible. You're aware of that, right? We're called the sheep of God's pasture. Many times that analogy is given through the Old Testament, the New Testament. That's what Psalm 23 is all about, that everyone knows. So figuratively, you and me, are the sheep of God's pasture. I am a sheep. Say this out loud. I am a sheep. God's sheep. And you may think, oh, that's so good. That's so sweet. I like that we're Jesus' warm, cuddly, snuggly, buggly sheep, right? That's a warm, fuzzy deal. Not so quick. My grandparents had some sheep when I was young, and yes, they can be cuddly, but I want to tell you something else. They can also be cantankerous and very mean. And they stink. And they poop a lot. You really want to, I'm serious, you really wouldn't want to spend a whole lot of time holding them, maybe the little lamb for a bit, but you wouldn't want to spend a whole lot of time with holding the sheep. So when we read here that God chose to be our shepherd, he did so knowing full well that our relationship with him would not always be a warm fuzzy. We would not always be worthy or deemed good to be cuddled up in his lap. Yet he chose to be our shepherd and have relationship. I mean, check this out. 3 things on your outline there. First of all, sheep are not real smart. You're probably aware of that, but for those of you who don't believe it, I want you to think about this. How many sheep have you seen in a circus? We have Barnum and Bailey for years, right down the road in Sarasota. You've either been there or been to the circus probably in your life sometime. How many of you have seen sheep in the circus or in Barnum and Bailey when they came to town? if you saw the circus, you saw trained lions and elephants and horses and dogs, right? But you never saw a trained sheep. They just don't have them in the circus. Heck, you can train it. Think about this. You can train a donkey. You can train a seal. You can train a bird. You can train a cat. You can even train a flea. You ever heard of a flea circus? I mean, you can even do that, but you can't train a sheep. How many of you have a dog that's trained to some degree? Anybody have a dog that's trained? Dog that you say sit, the dog will sit, or roll over, or fetch, or play dead. You know, bang, they fall over and play dead. The only way to make a sheep play dead is to actually shoot it. And that trick only works one time, and it's like, game over. Right? If you're a sheep farmer, I'm real sorry. I'm dissing your sheep today. So here's the deal for sheep are just not real smart, which is not the greatest news for us because being that we're God's sheep, you know. I mean, so you have to ask, could it be at times that you and I are not nearly as smart as we think we are? Could it be in life and living that we think we've got it all together and we understand the Bible and we got the things of God down pat? You know, we got it all fixed, but could it be that we're not quite as smart about those things as we think we are? Think of it this way. Sheep get lost easily. And guess what? So do we. And not just, I don't mean just on a road trip. Isaiah 53:6 says this, we all, just like sheep, have gone astray. Each one of us has turned to his own way. You see, what happens for a literal sheep, they will wander over here and graze, and then they will wander over there and graze, and then they will go over and wander this way and graze, and before long they're absolutely lost. They have no sense of direction, no way to get back. How many of you have someone in your home has no sense of direction? Ladies, you all raise your hands, right? The sheep has no sense of direction. They get lost easily. So what happens is the shepherd has to leave the rest of the sheep behind, and he has to go out, or she has to go out and look for that sheep to find where it is, and then bring it back to where it actually belongs. The same thing happens with us if you think that through. We say, oh, I think I'll go this way in life. That will make me happy. Or this relationship, that's who I need in my life to make me happy. Or over there, that looks like a lot of fun and a lot of fulfillment. No, maybe I should try this. And so we go to all these particular directions and try all these sorts of things. And then all of a sudden, our life is in disarray. And our life is in confusion and turmoil. And rather than having peace and abundance, we have that turmoil. So we're like the sheep in that they're not real smart. Number two, sheep are very stubborn. Look at someone and say, I think this one's for you because it sure can't be for me. Right? I read where a sheep will try to go into a crevice between two rocks, and they will often get stuck in there, and the shepherd has to come and get them out. The reason they do that is because they're too stubborn to back out. They just keep going until they get stuck. You never hear a sheep go beep, 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 and back up, right? There's no beeping and backing. They just go till they're stuck and they can't go any farther. How many of you know someone like that? They just so stubborn, they're this is the way it's supposed to be, this is the way I'm going, this is what I'm going to do, and you just go until you're stuck and you have to have someone pull you out. Maybe you're like that at times. Like that friend who's always broke. They got the credit cards maxed out all the time. They're so frustrating. And then in the midst of all that financialness, messiness, they'll call you up and they're all depressed and they're whining and they're saying, and they're crying, saying, I'm just so broke, I don't know what I'm going to do. Will you meet me at the mall so we can talk about it? Mall? Hello? Credit cards maxed? They want to go to the mall. Spend it. You're not getting me, are you? Okay, well, let's try this one. What about the person who says, why do I always wind up with this kind of guy? Why am I always attracting these kind of guys? Or why am I always attracting these kind of women? What's going on? when you make a statement like that, it says more about you than it does the guys you're attracting, or more about you than the women you're attracting. Does that make sense? Could it be your stubbornness just causes you to keep going in a certain direction instead of making those necessary changes? Okay, one more. Sheep are, number 3, they're defenseless. Most every animal has some sort of defense system. Cats have what? Claws. I didn't know that. I never had a cat. I had a dog until we got Gracie last year, and we gave her her first bath. My wife is very hygienic and very clean, and I love that about her, but she feels like everyone else has to be that way too. I don't necessarily agree with that for me personally, and our little Gracie doesn't agree with that either. So we decided that Gracie needed a bath. And so filled the sink up with water and did all this stuff. First bath we ever gave her. She said, "You're going to have to hold her." And I said, "Okay." So I grabbed the little, she's just a little kitty, what's she going to do, right? I started putting her in that water, and all 4 paws, every claw on her paw went, and she just stuck to my arm. And I'm saying words that I can't believe I can even, that I know. And my wife is going, "What did you say?" And this cat has just got this wild-eyed look at us, and all 4, and I take aspirin all the time, right? So I bleed easy. Oh man, I'm bleeding like that's a gusher going up, and I can't get the cat's paws out. And now I'm crying, got big tears coming out. I don't know what to do. So Nancy's pulling them out, claw by claw, get her out. So we've learned. Now when we give her a bath, man, I look like an umpire at a professional baseball game. I've got it all on before we ever get in there. So cats have claws. Some animals have teeth. Some have horns to butt you out of the way. Some have fangs. Some have wings to fly away. Others can change colors to blend in with their environment. But what about a sheep? Sheep have nothing. They're defenseless. All a sheep can do when it gets in trouble is say, "Back off." This is pretty funny stuff if you guys will just loosen up a little bit. Which is one more reason that you need a shepherd, and so do I, because we're defenseless. Number 2, let me move on to more serious stuff. Let's talk about the shepherd's love and care for us. There are any number of things that a true shepherd would do for his or her sheep, but I want to hone in on 2 in particular this morning. The first one is this: a shepherd guides. In verse 4 it says, "When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice." I remember the very first church I pastored, a little church out in the country, a little resort down in southern Oklahoma. And we had this missions conference where missionaries came and went to all the little Baptist churches in the area, and they spoke during the week, and they would switch and go to different churches. And we had one who stayed with us, he and his wife. And it was really a cool thing getting to know him. I'd never really been around a foreign missionary before, and so I learned so much from him. His story was interesting as he told it to us. Both he and his wife had master's degrees. They were both engineers. They were in a large growing company. They were both making a 6-figure salary back when I thought if I could ever make $1,000 a month, I'd hit the big time. Okay, that's how long ago this was. And so they told the story of how they believed God had ordered their steps and led them to really give up all that career and all their education in that area to go be with people and minister to people in a third world country. They told about living in the suburbs and going to this country and moving into basically a little hut that had a dirt floor with bamboo carpeting. They lived there for 2 years. They fetched their own water from a community well about 6 blocks away until some other people from the United States came and built a water system for the little village. Their lifestyle was completely antithetical to the one that they had back in this country. But here's what he said over and over. I listened to him speak in these churches all week long. Here's what he said. He always said, God led us to the most beautiful and satisfying place on earth. Not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional and spiritual sense as well. And he always ended his talks this way. He said, we are so glad we listened to his voice and followed him. Our gracious God, our guide. Isn't that good? He knew that the shepherd was his guide. Now, in Jesus' day, there were times when the shepherd was indisposed for some reason, maybe sickness or even death, whatever. When that happened, a stranger had to be hired. A hired hand had to come on board and step in and begin to tend the flock. The sheep immediately needed someone to tend them. But here was the problem with that. The problem was if the flock had to be moved, while they were stationary, while they were settled, everything was cool. But if they had to be moved, the sheep would not follow the newbie. They didn't recognize the newbie's voice. So they wouldn't follow that hired hand because he was not the true shepherd. In fact, verse 5 says, they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. So, because the sheep literally would run away if a stranger tried to lead them, that hired hand would most times get behind the sheep and begin to drive them, rather than standing out in front leading them. If you've ever seen a shepherd in some of these countries, the first time I went to Israel, we saw, as we were driving in the bus, we saw a shepherd probably with 80 sheep, and he was out in front a good 20 yards, just walking with his staff, just like it would be in Bible days, and the sheep just following right behind him. That's the kind of thing going on here. So this guy, the hired hand, they won't follow him, so he has to drive the sheep. A true shepherd would never do that. A true shepherd would never drive the sheep. They're always out front leading, safely guiding the sheep, and the sheep always follow. So here's a great question. Since Jesus is our shepherd, how does he guide us? Or better still, how do we know what and where God is guiding us? What to and where is God guiding us? How do we know that? Could I just say, I no longer, that the longer I preach and teach, the more convinced I am that we make questions like that way too hard. How does God lead me? What is God saying? All this kind of stuff. We make those questions like that way too hard. I'll tell you why. Look at verse 4. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him. Because why? Because they know his voice. And verse 14 says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. I get this now. The sheep follow because they know Jesus, and they know his voice. Oftentimes, someone will ask, but I can't hear God's voice. I don't know God's voice. How do I know when he's speaking to me? Now remember, first off, Jesus said his sheep, you and me, we know him and we know his voice. That pretty much settles the issue right there, right? We do. We don't have to learn to know it. We know it. And secondly, the problem is not that we can't hear him or that we don't know when he's speaking. The problem is either we don't believe he's speaking because we don't deem ourselves worthy, or it's just that we don't believe what we're hearing. You want to know how to hear God's voice? It's real simple. Except for those of you like me who are steeped in traditional religious thinking. If you weren't, then it's very simple. The way you learn to hear God's voice is just to simply get out there and be. Just go live. Just go do life. Do it like Jesus did, enjoying it. The Bible says Jesus came eating and drinking. That literally means in the Greek, Jesus came having fun. Jesus came partying, we would say in our vernacular. All right, just go enjoy life like that. And what you will discover as you do that and quit worrying about all the other things, just go live, you'll discover that because God's Spirit lives in you, you will instinctively know what to do, you will instinctively know where to go, and you will instinctively know what to say. Now, here's the question that everybody brings up. Well, what if I sin? What if I just go out there and live and I sin? OMG. What if I sin? You know what? What if you do? What if you do? Just keep being anyway. Stop worrying about sin. Sin is not your issue. If you are steeped in one of the 10 commandments and you're breaking one of them right now, adultery, stealing, hating someone in your heart, so you're guilty of murder, If you're all steeped up in that, that's not your problem. You may think it is, but it's not. Me being righteous already and believing that, that's the issue. The problem is I don't believe the right thing about myself. And so I keep living under the law, which says, don't do this, don't do that, be careful here, put a safeguard around you, get a group around you, don't go there, don't go. That's the law, that's works. Living under grace means I believe who I am. I believe that I'm the righteousness of God. I believe His Spirit indwells and fills me and will give me everything I need at just the right time. Amen. And so I live. And I go out and do anything I want to do. Every single week, every day. I do anything I want to. There are just some things I don't want to do. That makes sense? Sometimes I do the things I don't want to do, like the Apostle Paul. That bugs me. It bothers me. And so I come to God and I say, you know what, God? It ticks me off when I do that. It ticks me off when I say that. It ticks me off when I get involved in that. But I know you live in me. I know I'm righteous. So I'm just going to trust that your wisdom will give me everything I need not to be in that area the next time, or whatever it might be. So basically, get out there and enjoy life. And when and if you get a check in your spirit, or there's a reason to pause at something, just avoid it, at least for a bit, until you can think it through. And God will give you that. You get this check in the spirit, right? You're going somewhere, you're getting ready to say something, do something, you go, I don't feel good about that. Back off. If you don't feel good about it, back off. Think it through. Come to a conclusion, and God's Spirit will cause you to do that. And what happens is you will immediately recognize what you ought to do and what you should avoid. Most important, you're going to realize the power of the God in you to help you make that recognition. So here's what I'm saying. I'm saying quit overthinking everything. The truth of the matter is most of us have enough Bible and God teaching in us right now to last 3 lifetimes. What it comes down to at some point is just trusting that God is going to be God in your life, and the shepherd, in fact, will guide you. Without a lot of work, just living with Him. Number 2, not only does God guides, but God provides. Look in verse 7. So Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the door for the sheep. All the people who came before me were thieves and robbers. The sheep did not listen to them. I am the door, and the person who enters through me will be saved and will be able to come in and go out and find pasture. Now, you've heard the stories before and the analogies. What happens is a shepherd builds a pen for his sheep, especially if he's going to be in an area for any length of time grazing certain parts of hillsides. He'll build it nicely. And it's called a sheepfold, and basically what it is a circular rock barrier that was high enough so the sheep couldn't jump out, and also that enemies would have predators. It would be difficult for them to jump in. And just to make sure, he would usually put briars and brambles around the top of it, like you've seen a prison with barbed wire over the top of the fence. It's that kind of a mindset. Again, the sheep couldn't get out and the enemy couldn't get in. At nighttime, the opening, the door of the sheepfold, the shepherd would lay down across the door or in that opening. So you've got this wall, you've got the brambles and the thorns, and you've got the shepherd lying in front of these rocks. Again, the sheep couldn't get out, the enemy could not come in. Something else, though, that's I think is the coolest of all is that every evening the sheep had time with the shepherd. They had individual time and one-on-one time. There were assistant shepherds for larger flocks, usually family members, but sheep got personal attention from one of those shepherds every single night. And what would happen is the sheep would come in, and the shepherd would call each one of them so that he could tuck them in for the night. How many of you tuck your children in, or you've been tucked in before, right? Yeah? Well, the sheep get tucked in too, and here's how they get tucked in. The shepherd would take a sheep and caress and rub and probe the wool of each one of those sheep. He was not just massaging the sheep, although he was, but he was more importantly checking for wounds and sores and abrasions. And if he found any of those, he would pour in oil for healing and massage it in. Do you remember in Psalm chapter 23, thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over? That's this thing going on right here. And he would massage that oil into those wounded areas. Think spa time for the sheep. Sheep spa. That might be a good business for some of you. That's what was going on. The shepherd knew everything there is to know about each one of his sheep. He knew all their habits. He knew their lifestyle. He knew everything about their wounds and about their wool and everything. In fact, the shepherd always named his sheep. And when he called them, he always called them by name. Verse 3 says, the doorkeeper opens the door for him. The sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Isn't that something? Shepherd names his sheep, just like you've named your pets in your house. I mentioned the first trip I made to Israel. I went with a businessman in my church whose son-in-law and daughter were living in Israel at the time. And so we went over and basically had a private tour of Israel for 2 weeks. It was one of the best experiences ever for me. The man who took me, this businessman, he was one of the largest ranchers in southern Oklahoma. He owned all kinds of businesses, but he owned lots and lots of horses and racehorses and all that sort of stuff. And he was a cowboy, and he dressed like a cowboy. He had Wrangler jeans and boots. Every single day of his life that I ever saw him, he wore a starched button-down collar shirt. I mean, it was starched rigid, and his cowboy hat. We went to Israel. That's all he wore. Hot, dusty trails, it didn't matter. That's what he wore every day that we went out. What was funny was when we got over there, the TV show Dallas was still on. Some of you are too young to remember, but some of you are old enough to remember the show Dallas with J.R. Ewing and all that family, right? And so everywhere we would go, the vendors in the old city, they would call you over to try to sell you some of their wares. They would say, J.R., 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 J.R. And they would call him over there because of J.R. Ewing. They were fascinated with this. Well, get this. On one of our stops, we pulled over one day because there were some sheep out there, and a shepherd was sitting around. And my friend told his son-in-law, I said, pull over there. I want to get a picture there with that shepherd and the sheep. So he pulls over, and we go ask the man. He asks the man if we can take a picture with him. The man was so excited about that picture. Do you know why? Because one of his sheep was named, guess what?
J.R.
J.R. Get it? Ewing. Don't ever think shepherds are dumb. No, I get it. The true story. So he didn't even charge my friend for the picture. He wanted him to take the picture because his sheep was named J.R. and he's got still have a picture with him and J.R. From Israel. Can you imagine God our shepherd speaking your name often? Can you imagine that? You don't. I know you don't think about that regularly. I don't as well. But we ought to maybe do that. God speaking our name. God knows our name. That's about the greatest thing I can think of. You know, it does a lot of good when someone calls your name. I'm guilty of this the older I get. I used to be so good with names, but now I find myself, somebody will come up to me and startle me and say, hey, Pastor. I say, hey. You do that? And it's not a bad thing because most everybody does it, I guess, but it really does you good when somebody calls your name. Yesterday, Nancy and I were in a store, and I heard this voice say, Pastor Mike. And I turned around, it was someone I hadn't seen for years, and we had a great conversation. She called me by name. It makes a difference. It's wonderful when someone calls you by name. And God speaks our name. Now, what does all that mean? Tending these sheep, God speaking your name, rubbing the sheep in, taking care of their wounds. Here's what it means. It means the shepherd provides for us in every way possible. It means he knows everything about us. He knows every hurt we have. He knows every pain we have. He knows every struggle we experience. He is aware of every tear that spills down your cheek. And not only does he know it, he does something about it. Check this out. In John chapter 16, verse 33. Jesus says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. The shepherd is the overcomer. And the overcoming shepherd lives in you by his Spirit every moment through everything you experience. In your moment of pain and suffering, he is walking through that experience with you. When you are down and almost out, or when you are down and out, whatever the situation is, the shepherd is there walking with you, in you. And here's what we're going to do to end today. We're going to break up into two groups. Actually, what I'm going to ask you to do is this. I'm going to ask this group right here to kind of move toward the middle, and I'm going to ask this group to kind of move toward the middle. Nancy's going to lead prayer over in this group. Whit's going to lead prayer over in this group. Here's what we're going to do. If you want to pray in your group, we'll give you a moment to do that. All right? If you'd like to pray. Maybe someone has a need in your group, and you could pray for them this morning. Maybe you have a need, and someone could pray for you. Nevertheless, Nancy and Whit, give people a time in their group for a few minutes. We're not going to spend a long time at this. Don't freak out. But give people opportunity if they'd like to pray. And then if it goes silent for a while, then you end the prayer time, okay? All right, let's start moving into position right there. Just for a few minutes. Nobody's going to be embarrassed, I promise you. Nobody's going to be called out for anything. Now, while we're moving into these groups here, let me say to you, thank you for joining us, Facebook Live, YouTube. We're glad you tune in with us on Sundays. Please help us by spreading the word, by going to our website, by donating on our website. If you feel led to do that, that would really help us as well, too. It's a pleasure. We're glad that you've spent some time with us on Sunday morning. God bless you. We'll be praying for your needs today, too. See you next week. So just as soon as you get here.